But we're going to start with some sad news today. Scott Adams passed away, 68 years old, most famed as the Dilbert creator, but really did a lot of other interesting stuff with his life, which is what interests me the most about him. He even co-wrote a book with my friend and colleague, Joel Pollack, who worked for me at Breitbart over a decade. He's at the California Post now. I will do an additional podcast with Joel, who's also a Middle East expert, so I'll talk about his friendship with Scott, and we'll also talk about the Middle East, where he's was my guy there for many years at Breitbart. So that will be on the podcast feed. Can't recommend it enough. We are putting out additional shows wherever you get your podcast: YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, Apple. So we'll talk to him about that. But one thing that's interesting about Scott is how I just love the way he lived his life with so much vigor. And he was someone who has put himself out there a lot. He had a popular podcast called Coffee with Scott Adams that he would do every morning. It was sort of ubiquitous in my feed on X, the Everything app. He was an early adopter to Trump. He was someone who understood Trump from the start. And part of what he understood about him was that Trump is so persuasive. And that was what he keyed in on with Trump as a media figure himself, as someone who had not only created the Dilbert cartoon, but had also been on lots of television shows and things like that. He saw Trump's ability to connect with people and persuade them on certain issues. And he did things, not just podcasting and comic strips and writing books, of which I've read several of his books. They're all very, very good and lots of wisdom and insight. But he even did stuff like he invented something called the Dill burrito, where, yes, he came up with a burrito that he thought would be perhaps the only food item you would need to eat. It was like a full nutritional thing where if you could just eat this burrito, then that would be all you would need. And he'd create these systems. He talked about the concept of systems a lot, where he thought that he was able to live his best life by trying to dial in his mechanisms of being able to optimize success and efficiency. And I just think that's so good, because for me, when I have my best ideas, it's when the things in my life are not interfering, they're not intruding on my ability to think clearly. And he thought one of the keys to that was having a clear nutrition plan and exercise regimen and work schedule, and all of these systems that he recommended is something that I used in my personal life because I heard it from him first. And of course, a very funny, insightful guy who is bold about predicting things about Trump and offered a lot of wisdom and insight. And he had a terminal cancer, I think it was prostate cancer, that was metastatic, and he'd been warning his followers since last summer that this is close to the end. But he's someone who's going to be a massive loss for the conservative movement and the Trump movement in particular. President Trump has already put out a nice statement on his behalf. I was told that President Trump was communicating with him repeatedly throughout his last days here. But terrible news that I caught in the car on the way in. And I will tell you that he is someone that we can all learn a lot from. So, and this is part of the reason why books are so valuable, and also creating art is valuable. These things last. So any of his books, I think, would be pretty good to check out, because he was ahead of the curve on a lot of things, including Trump. And I'm sure you'll pick up some wisdom and insight. But God rest in peace to Scott Adams. I will tell you one thing that's also interesting about Scott at the very end. He was an atheist all of his life, but apparently, according to reports, he accepted Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior to a degree at the end. He said it was a value calculation. He said it in a very Scott Adams sort of way, that the value proposition was much better for him if he chose to accept Jesus at the last moments of his life, even though he had said flat out, "I'm not a believer." And I don't know why he added that classification or qualification, but noteworthy in that he did see what many of us see, which is that the true path to heaven is accepting Jesus as your Lord and Savior. So hopefully that's where Scott is today, and an incredible legacy. And that's one thing that we should all strive for, is to have a legacy. When you leave, that people can say things that you should really take a look at what this guy said or stood for or did or created, because that is what it's all about for me. I mean, it starts with family, which he had children, I know, as well, but then it goes to your career as well. So a great American, and he will be missed.